Hey, welcome. I'm Hannah Norton. I'm chair of the Oslo Belonging and Community Engagement Committee, and we're so happy to be hosting Nisha Moody today and later this month. The idea to offer training on trauma-informed librarianship has actually been on the committee's radar for several years now. It came out of responses to a survey following a session like this, so please do continue to provide feedback. Oslo really does listen to that. And Nisha was the first name that came up as an expert in trauma-informed healing and a former health sciences librarian. As you may know, Nisha has developed a self-paced course on trauma-informed and relational care for libraries, and we're excited to have her share some of the ideas from that course today and in 2 weeks. Um, on a logistical note, if you have any technical issues with Zoom, you can chat directly with the Oslo office account, and Kelsey will be able to help you out. And without further ado, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Nisha, and I'll hand you over to Nisha Moody.
Hi everyone. So happy to be here. So happy to see some familiar faces and names. And also happy to see some folks I haven't seen or met before. So this is a two-part series and it is recorded. So hello to everyone that's here in the room live and everyone who's watching. I know some of you might want to take notes and that's great, but at the end I also will share the slides for you. I'm just asking to get some feedback for my purposes because that really helps me to make my work more supportive, more actionable, and accessible for you. And before I start, I just, want to open with the fact that there is so much global trauma happening right now. Here's Vera. She says hello, hello. She's been literally on the ground like for the last 5 minutes looking up at me to jump up. And of course, she always jumps when I start talking. But yeah, there's just so much to name about what's happening that, I could probably spend so much time doing that from genocide to abuse by powerful men to ICE. And trauma-informed care is not about just what's happening to us individually, right? It's absolutely informed by what's happening around us in the world and how that impacts our well-being. Even last week, I was very impacted by what I was reading online. And one thing that I'm trying to do is really limit my phone scrolling and drop a +1 in the chat if that's something that you're trying to do or would like to do. I know as information workers, it really helps. We love to have that information, but truly from like a neurological standpoint, our brain does not have the capacity to take in all of the information and to process it emotionally. And we have every right to be angry and frustrated and sad about what's happening. But the more we constantly look, it can exacerbate the anger and the frustration to the point where you're numb or frozen. And our anger can be actually be used as a fuel in ways to support the collective. So I invite you to see what it can look like to get enough information and also know when it's time to step away. So that is like one little actionable thing. I know it's hard. I have an app on my phone that blocks all my social media. I've been using it quite a bit lately, and that has been extremely helpful. And it actually gives me more time to read about things like trauma-informed care, to do the work that I want to do and that I know I'm meant to do for the purposes of talking about topics like these. All right, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Okay. Sorry, my kitty's having trouble. Okay. All right. Okay, everyone can see my screen. Yes, typical cat, totally. All right, thank you. All right, so yes, today we're talking about navigating relational change, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. But one thing I always like to do when I start anything is take a moment to settle in our bodies. And I know maybe some of you may not be in the space. You could just listen to your breath, or maybe just take a moment to even like push yourself away from your screen for a moment if that is not something that you can do. And I always say close your eyes or lower your gaze, because sometimes people closing their eyes can actually be re-traumatizing for them. And so you do have choices. So feel free to close your eyes or lower your gaze and just allow yourself to arrive today. And you might be sitting, you might be standing. If you're sitting, just notice that whatever you're sitting on the chair, a stool, whatever it is holding you. And just allow it to hold you. Feel that support that it's giving you. And if you're standing, allow the surface below you to hold you. Just notice what that feels like when you give it that permission. Just breathe naturally and just notice your breath, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of curiosity. And I invite you to place one hand on your heart space and one on your belly, and just feel your chest rise and fall naturally. And then just slow your breath down just a little bit and notice how that feels for you. And as you're doing this, I want you to really feel your feet on the surface below you, if you can access it. If not, you can just imagine you're maybe sitting or standing on grass or the soil or a beach. And just really feel the connection to the surface below you, knowing that that is connected to a surface below that, that is ultimately connected to the earth. And really just feel that grounding, that gravitational pull that connects us to the earth. And we'll just close out by taking some inhales through our noses and exhales through our mouths. And we'll just get a little deeper each time, and I'll guide you. So just take a gentle inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. You're also welcome to sigh on the exhale. That could be something really soothing for your nervous system. A little deeper inhale and deeper exhale. And then last one, the deepest inhale through your nose and exhale. Feel free to open your eyes or lift your gaze whenever you're ready. And then if you want, I invite you to drop in the chat how that was for you. Whether you want to drop emojis or a word or whatever you want to share. I'd love to hear it. Okay. Yeah, feel free to share and I'll introduce myself for especially for those of you who don't know me. Yeah, we need to do this more at work. Yeah, I invite you, anyone, to start a meeting like that. Like, even if it's just taking 3 breaths, like, let's all just take 3 breaths. It can really change the trajectory of a meeting, especially if you're back-to-back meetings. I remember that, like it can be really, really supportive. Okay, so um, as you know, my name is Nisha Modi. I see some familiar faces here. Like I mentioned, you might remember me from MLA or NNLM. And I've had many careers, including consultant, recruiter, speech language pathologist, and librarian. And as a librarian, I was a liaison for UCLA's medical school, and I was also the associate director for NNLM, Pacific Southwest region. And I came to this work because I found myself always in life, really. I feel like everything was leading to this point, more passionate about how we connect and disconnect from each other and ourselves. So I really made it my life's work to start my business by coaching people individually and sharing in these group settings to move from inherited trauma to a values aligned legacy, something that you're leaving behind through your actions that are values aligned by confronting the hard relationships, the hard conversation, and also what's holding you back from expressing yourself in order to make this world better. I mean, this isn't just personal, it is professional. Inherited trauma is similar to maybe legacy toxicity you might be familiar with. I know Wendy Holiday and Katrina Davis Kendrick presented about that in Calm, just looking at institutions and how there can be that legacy toxicity from previous administrations and previous ways of working and things like that. So I wanted to share some links in the chat that will also be shared in a follow-up email. Um, these are invitations for you to engage with some of my work. As Hannah mentioned, I have a course called Trauma Informed and Relational Care for Libraries. The first link here is just to get some email updates from me. And you can also be added to my regular email list. And I also have a really amazing free resource called The 7 Tools to Cultivate Revolutionary Relationships in a Dystopian World. That will also add you to my regular, I have like kind of 2 parts of my email list, one just kind of for library, trauma informed stuff, and also for my other programs, if you're interested. So, but that tool, the second one, is a very robust, amazing tool that I love. Even when I read it over, it reminds me of what can be supportive for myself. The third link is my self-paced course that you can get information to. I also have institutional pricing. And you can also get 20 MLA credits. Until like June 23rd, I believe it expires. I'm not sure if I'm going to renew it. If there is a lot of interest, feel free to let me know because I'm not sure if there is. But that is if you need PDs, if you have PD money left, this is a great course to get 20 hours for. And you can also set a time to chat with me if you want to explore institutional pricing or workshops at your institution, or for a committee or for an association or whatever you're a part of. And like I said, this will be sent to you. And the last link was that legacy toxicity talk that Wendy and Katrina did at Calm in 2022. Okay, so just a few notes before we get started. I'm not a psychological therapist, nor is this a substitute for therapy. What I'm talking about today is one of many ways to look at ourselves, the work we do, and the world around us. And while I wish I could get to everything, as I said, I have a whole course about it, I will be leaving some things out. And what I talk to you about will not give you all of the answers, but I really hope it helps you ask different questions because I think through our curiosity and by asking different questions and through imagination, so much is possible. You might resonate with what I'm talking about on a personal level. That does not mean anything is wrong with you, but it does show that like I said, the personal lots of times is a professional and vice versa. What we bring into our professional space is impacted by who we are and where we come from. And I also love to say that instead of focusing on okay, this is right, this is wrong, or this is good, or this is bad, or I'm good, or I'm bad, think about what cannot change or be created when you actually only focus on that kind of moralizing perfection. And thinking about, if some of you are familiar with the white supremacy culture characteristics, how that talks about only one right way, binary thinking. So really trying to think more expansively in that way. I also want to start with a land acknowledgement for where I am, and I know a lot of you are in different places, but I live on a land once known as Tovangar. It was the home of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, who were the stewards of this land before it was settled. And this is in the Los Angeles region. You could see this map is actually in the LA Times. It shows all of the different locations of the land once known as Tovangar. I also think it's really important to name this not just in a way that is okay, here's where I am, but also from a trauma lens. We human beings are the earth just as much as the trees are, just as the flowers and bees are. Our biology is part of this ecology. And when the land is extracted from and taken from its original caretakers, when we are not in right relationship with it, there will be a trauma response even with the earth, including the land and ourselves. So I'm really saying this also in the context of being trauma informed. So something, if you take my course, you'll see me say, is this really great quote by Arthur Ashe, who was the first and only Black man to win Wimbledon. He says, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. So we'll take a breath and say that again. Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. I will be sharing a few different techniques, a few different ideas today, and you can just take a couple things away. Start where you are. You don't have to do everything. By shaming yourself that you can't do everything or can't know everything, it is not going to be something that's useful for you or the people that you want to support. So really have to start with those small steps and do what you can. And just knowing that that is enough. So as you know, we have two workshops. This is navigating relational change. And really, when I talk about relational change, it's something that occurs when power dynamics shift because of how you relate to others and yourself, and which can activate specific responses. So if someone is promoted, or if someone has a different position, or changes, or leaves an institution, that can impact how you relate to them, right? And that is specifically what I was asked to come talk about today, because I know that those shifting dynamics can impact friendships, it can impact projects, etc. And then we will continue on February 27th to talk about how to cultivate trustworthiness in the workplace. And the workplace can be even like across, like it be for a medical library association, different ways and modalities of what your workplace is. And looking at cultivating trustworthiness by befriending those responses that come up. So this will definitely be a continuation from last time, from today for next time. Identifying your feelings and your needs and leaning into liberatory power, which is what we're going to talk about today. So the learning outcomes for today are to identify trauma-informed reframes that resonate with your library role, define power over versus power with, which you're also going to do, and identify nervous system responses, that's supposed to say based on power dynamics. So that is what we will talk about today. So I always like to give a little introduction about trauma-informed care for those who aren't familiarized and just to ground ourselves in it. So the SAMHSA definition of just trauma is individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual, is physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So one thing that I always like to say is that the trauma is not the event itself. It is the impact of the event. It is how you respond, because two people can be involved, like two people can be in like a vehicle accident, for example, but they can have different effects. One person might have more of a fight response. One person might have very repressed memories. There's a lot of different things that could happen, even though you experience the same traumatic event itself. So I think that's a really important distinction and discernment to be made, because trauma shows up years later. I was just on vacation with my partner, and there was something that happened that activated something in me from 15 years ago, you know? So it lives in your body, and it's the effect. Even though nothing unsafe actually happened, it did impact me. And then systemic trauma, because it's not just individual trauma. Systemic trauma, just to know that individual trauma can result from systemic trauma, which looks at how larger systemic factors can cause and are intermingled with trauma. So that includes race, migration, patriarchy, ableism, colonialism, capitalism, all of these large systems, and how that impacts us on an individual level. And I really love this quote from Resmaa Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands. He says that trauma decontextualized in a person looks like a personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. Trauma decontextualized in a people looks like culture. So it's really important to discern, like, what is culture versus the trauma that has impacted that culture? What is your personality, who you are, versus how trauma has impacted you? I do a lot of work with people around people pleasing and codependency, and they'll be like, "I'm such a people pleaser. Like, it's just my personality." And I usually gently, I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this, that oftentimes people pleasing is a survival response, and it's not who you are. It might show up in terms of some behaviors, but that is something that can be shaped, and new stories can be created to unlearn it. And I have a course called Meet Yourself, where the first module is it my trauma response or my personality? We start that way, just because it can be really easy to just say, like, they're the same thing. So feel free to drop in the chat. I'd love to hear if this reframing is helpful, because I think it's so easy, even for myself, coming from being a daughter of South Asian immigrants. I've even found myself like, oh, Indian people like do this, or whatever. And then I always have to tell myself, like, well, how has colonization impacted our sense of scarcity? How has the migration patterns in the diaspora, that what I see specifically in the diaspora in the West, impact behaviors that I see, right? So it helps me take a step back, because I'm even, culpable and susceptible to thinking this way. Yeah. I also want to define safety. Gabor Mate, who talks a lot about trauma, and he himself is actually a Holocaust survivor who's still alive. He has a really great book called The Myth of Normal. Um, he says safety is the absence of threat and the presence of connection. And I think this is really helpful. Um, Actually, I will say I've seen him say it two ways. I've seen him say safety is the absence of a threat and the presence of connection. And I've also heard him say safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of connection. But what I do think is helpful is knowing that sometimes we just think that safety is that there's no threat. But if you are activated, or like I said, like I was activated on this trip, I had to do something to connect. I had to tell my partner and I asked for a hug. I needed to connect in some way for me to feel eased, for me to support my nervous system. And when I talk about the nervous system, I'm also going to say I don't really say there's a lot of stuff out there about nervous system regulation. I actually don't like regulation, that word, because it just sounds like you're fixing it or it's just to calm down, which that's not what it is. We need our nervous system responses to fight or flight when we need to survive. And it's really about relating and supporting and nourishing your nervous system. So that's my take on it. And I've talked to a lot of people about that. But this is what safety is. But what ends up happening is that we perceive a threat from previous threats that we have in our lives that, do go over in our professional lives. And we don't know how to support ourselves in those moments. So then if we don't have that way to connect, we cannot feel safe. So we have to think about the perception of threat. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong or that you're lying. It is happening. What is happening in your body is absolutely happening. How you respond completely makes sense. And there are ways to shift that. So to put it simply, trauma-informed care asks what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. And most literature on this topic is in like the social work and psychology disciplines, where maybe asking this question, like what happened to you, is more acceptable, like in a therapeutic setting. This is also depending like on your relationship with someone. Maybe you can ask someone like, what's going on? Like, is everything okay? And maybe in some cases you don't have that type of relationship. So this is where I invite you to think about how this mindset itself, and I'll actually have some more reframes very soon for you to see and to think about, can help you even act differently. When you think, when you're in traffic, even for example, and like someone cuts you off 3 times and you're like, oh, what's wrong with that person? I mean, I think we've all been there. Feel free to share in the chat if you've been there. We might think like what's wrong with them, but they might be rushing to somewhere where there's an emergency. They may have had like a really awful morning where they were traumatized themselves. And sometimes they might just be rude. I mean, that's absolutely like true. But when you change that, it actually impacts how you respond in that situation when you change that mindset. So really trauma-informed care is about reconnecting people back to safety and to choose what is best for them, because it isn't our business to do it for them. And this is also where I always say that I never call anything a safe space. I say you can cultivate safe spaces, you can cultivate safety. I never say this is a safe space, because it's not my business to say what's safe for someone. Someone could just walk into any room and feel unsafe because of their own history, because of intergenerational trauma, because of legacy toxicity or something from a previous organization. But you can do things to cultivate that safety. So yeah. And yes, Manuel, thank you. Even the rudeness can come from somewhere in that person's life. Absolutely. And, I even say that things like capitalism, patriarchy, even though something like that, like patriarchy might benefit men in some ways, it also really hurts them, so that pain and that rudeness and all of that comes from a specific place. And I'll actually make another point about that, like when someone does cause harm, what that has to do with trauma as well. But first I want to talk about these reframes. I have this in my course, and a lot of people have like printed this out and put it in their like offices. I'm just going to go through each one, and I want you to really think to yourself, which reframes are helpful in this moment. I'm going to do a little like feedback with Mentimeter for this. So there's moving from power over to power with, which we will talk more about today. So like as you see on the left side, it's not trauma informed, and the right is trauma informed. So moving from power over to power with, moving from the idea that you can't change to your brain is plastic, moving from judging to observing. And if you remember when we had a moment to settle in the beginning, I actually said, notice your breath from a place of curiosity, that observation, not judgment, right? Moving from people need fixing first to people need safety first, moving from operating from the dominant culture to cultural humility, moving from people are out to get you to people can live up to the trust you give them, moving from right versus wrong to multiple viewpoints, something I mentioned in the beginning, moving from helping to learning. How do you feel like you're helping someone versus like supporting their learning? Moving from you're crazy, which itself is like an ableist word, to it makes sense. Um, Moving from compliance and obedience to empowerment and collaboration, which is actually a principle of trauma informed care. Moving from something that has to be a need to know basis for information to transparency and predictability. And I think this is a really big one for organizations. How can you be transparent? Even if your transparency is like, I don't know, but I want to tell you I don't know, and I want to tell you. Like, even that itself can be more supportive than just gatekeeping. Um, Moving from what is the presenting issue that you see, that there's a whole to there's a whole person in history, which is, what folks are talking about in the chat. Um, Moving first is like us and them to we're all in this together. That interdependence that exists in like a whole ecosystem, whether it's an organization, the earth, your family, etc. Moving from labels and pathology to behavior as communication, right? Behavior is a way that we communicate something that is happening within. Moving from being fear-based to empathy-based. Moving from I'm here to fix you to support your healing. That has been a huge shift in my life. As someone who I've always wanted to, help people, like there is a part that I've noticed that actually has to do with almost like a sense of control about fixing, as opposed to how can I just have empathy or support this person's healing or just show up and be there and listen. Moving from something that's just didactic to participatory, which I think is a great thing for like teaching and learning, information literacy, etc. Moving from people make bad choices to people who feel unsafe do unsafe things. I'm going to say that again. People who feel unsafe do unsafe things. And this next one kind of goes with that, like the labels and pathology one. So behavior viewed as a problem, so that you add a label or pathology, to behavior viewed as a solution. So if I act out or have a fight response, that is actually something that solves a feeling that I have in my body. So we might say that, you know, like even if I'll just have a simple example of like, you have a fever, right? That could be seen as a problem, a pathology, like being having a high fever or a label, but the fever is actually a solution to help support your body, right? It's what your body is doing to actually help you. So hopefully that's a simple way to explain that. Moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, which I mentioned earlier. Moving from blame and shame to respect. Moving from the goal is to do things the quote unquote right way to the goal is to connect. How can I connect with this person versus say that this is right versus wrong? I'm just going to take a sip of my tea. Moving from something's prescriptive, the two maybe having choice. Moving from people are bad to people are doing the best they can. Moving from only considering research and evidence to considering lived experience, which I think is another really one that transfers directly to library workers. And then moving from being an expert to being an enlightened witness is also one that I really like. So I really want to invite you to think about which reframes are the most important, feel most helpful for you in this moment. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a Mentimeter for you to share that. Yeah, which reframes here, you could put multiple, are helpful for you in this moment. Do you think it would be helpful for you generally? And I'll just move over here so we could see what you all, well, actually, I'll keep this here and then I'll move to the screen so that you can see what these are first. And then I'll move over in a few minutes. Oh, Ray says in the chat, the one has been my guide as a manager is people need safety first. I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's a great um, way to guide yourself as a manager. Absolutely. For as being any type of leader, even if you're like heading up a committee, I think that that is really important. Okay. I'll give another minute for you to look at this and I'll switch to the screen where folks have responded. So you have people who feel unsafe do unsafe things. It makes sense. And other people who feel unsafe, people are out to get you versus people can live up to the trust you give them. Lived experience. You're crazy to it makes sense. Goal is to connect, resonates with me in this moment. Beautiful. People doing the best they can. We're all in this together. Support healing. Helping to learning. People need safety first. Us and them to we're all in this together. Yeah, definitely. Prescriptive versus choice. People are doing the best they can. And like I said, especially for the folks who came in later, I'll have a brief little survey at the end, and then once you finish that, there you'll actually get all the slides, so you'll be able to have this for yourself as well. Um, your brain is plastic. Yeah, I think that's a really, really big one. That's actually something, as I mentioned, I'm trying to redo with the way scrolling on social media has it impacts our brains. It directly impacts our brains. It like literally is there to hack our dopamine. Like social media companies know that science, right? So, but that it doesn't have to stay that way. You know, when I have limits, like it is that is actually a way I'm cultivating safety for myself, to be quite honest. Um, Something that actually I'm just on a very personal note that happened to me after October 7th was I was scrolling so much and looking at really horrific images so much that I started getting vertigo. And I never had that in my entire life. And I had to put my phone away. I had to stop looking because I realized in that moment, like this isn't actually helping anyone. If I actually want to support with this terrible thing that's happening, like scrolling and looking and not and feeling like I'm spinning is not going to be supportive. So once again, I had to like kind of shift that. And this isn't even like with other people. This is like with myself, but it impacts how I relate to other people, right? All right, thank you so much, everyone. And I actually have a follow-up question you could just share in the chat um, to share. Huh. Which situations or relationships would these reframes be supportive for you? And I forgot to say in the beginning, if you feel like you just want to message me directly just to share with me, you are welcome to do that. If that, I'm not sure if that's possible in the chat. If not, you could just let me know later. Yeah, which situations, and you could even be broad, you don't have to specify names or anything like that, but how do you think this would be having these, which situations or relationships would having these reframes feel supportive? With family, yeah. Interpersonal relationships, for sure. Yeah. I feel like I could just do a whole workshop on like narrowing down a few of those. And we are going to talk about power over versus power with next as connected to like dynamics and relational change. Um, but yeah, like there's so many that we could explore. But hopefully this is going to be a helpful tool for you to use and to remind yourself of the possibilities, what can happen if we just shift that a little bit. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I just want to take a short pause and just take a breath. I really like this image of these lungs with these flowers. So just take a breath or just ground your feet on the ground. Just a good way to reground ourselves. I'm sure all of this stuff might have brought up people that bother you, people that trigger you. That's okay. We all have those people in our lives. None of us are immune to that. I mean, if you are, please let me know. But it just might take a moment to ground ourselves. So that might be a breath, might be grounding. It might just be, you could just look at something pleasant in a room, a photo, flowers, a plant, your cat, whatever it is. Please do that. All right. So now we're going to move to power over versus power with, as these cats are beautiful examples of, in my in my opinion. Um, so I actually want to ask you, um, and you could drop in the chat or even raise your hand if you'd like. How do you define power over versus power with? So just take a minute to think about that. And you're actually going to write your own definitions after I share more information, but I'm curious right now, how would you define that? And if you want to raise your hand and say it out loud, you're welcome to, or you could just share in the chat. Authority versus collaboration. Yes, I love that. Hierarchy versus empowerment. Yeah. Yeah. Being heard at all level is powered with. Yeah. Power over may equal to influencing or manipulating someone else. Power with is taking control over your life decision. Ah, I love that. Yeah, that's great. Exert influence unilaterally over another versus exert influence together with another. Yeah, very good. I like that. Yeah, what I'm hearing with I think is Roshana. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct. I apologize if I'm not. Um, I really love that framing. I've actually never like thought about that directly, but it sounds like how are you taking agent having your own agency versus almost like projecting on somebody else. Deb says you do versus let's do. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay, great. I'm glad that that was what you were saying. Thank you. Beautiful. You do versus let's do. I think that's such a beautiful, simplistic way, simplistic in a good way to kind of share that. You do versus let's do. And in a way, it always is let's do. It's just if you think of it as you do, that impacts a dynamic of a team, of like a one-on-one relationship. Um, like how is this impacting all of us and supporting all of us in a way? Beautiful. All right, feel free to keep dropping, but I'm going to move on to share some definitions of power um, from a structural systemic point of view. Um, so looking at power, that is the legitimate slash legal ability to access and control institutions sanctioned by the state. I think that that's a really important way to think about it structurally. That's from Barbara Major from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Um, the second definition is the authority granted through social structures and conventions, possibly supported by force or the threat of force, and access to means of communication and resources. I'm going to say that again. The authority granted through social structures and conventions, possibly supported by force or the threat of force, and access to means of communications and resources. And I really like how there's that like kind of nuanced caveat, like possibly supported by force or the threat of force, because it doesn't have to be that way. Like there might be like I think Hannah had said that like the hierarchy, right? That might be there, but the hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be power with, right? There can be the force, but there can be like the let's do versus you do, right? Like Deb had mentioned. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to share these definitions in the context of systems. I also want to share these ways of looking at power from Cindy Suarez. She has this book called The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. She says power is relational. It operates in relationships of inequality where we seek advantage, and so it is intentional. We are also lessened by the inability to assert equality of right and opportunity in an interaction. So we are also lessened by the inability to assert equality of right and opportunity in interaction. If you look at that, when there's someone seeking that advantage, power is exercised, not acquired. Everyday interactions contain aims and objectives that make the exercise of power visible and understandable. So it really is through that action that you take, that you receive, all of those different actions. And then power is never absolute. There is always resistance. Power is a force field of relationships based on some type of inequality. And I think that is, there's like a flow to that, right? And there's these different dynamics to that. And she also says to assert one's own power in a way that promotes mutuality, one must know the type of power one seeks, right? So this is where it really has to be intentional. And sometimes it could be just a passive thing that you've just noticed that this is how things have been done and this is what my role is, so I'm just going to do it. But when you have that intention and understand what type of power you're seeking, and what values are also associated with that. I'm very big on values. I have a really great values workbook where I always start with my clients with their values to make values-based goals, because then we actually know what we're working with. And anything that comes up in coaching sessions with folks, I'll be like, well, this aligns with your value, or what value does this align with, or does this align with your values? Oftentimes also, I think what makes us angry about the world is that, and we might not directly realize, is that something that makes us angry about a person or the world, or people in power especially, is that it might not, they're violating like what we value. So really knowing the type of power you seek and knowing what your values are really helpful. Okay, I think my cat's gonna like fly behind me in a second. I'm not sure. Okay, no. I was like watching. All right. So here are two types of power. So she talks about the power you seek. So two types of power is supremacist power and liberatory power. So supremacist power is the ability to dominate or control people and things. This power rests on relative rank and the privilege of being at the top. It reflects a supremacist way of thinking and acceptance of a relationship of domination and submission. It's a crude form of power related to scarcity consciousness, or the belief that the world holds limited supplies of the things we want: love, power, and recognition. Whereas liberatory power is the ability to create what we want. It stems from an abundance consciousness. Liberatory power requires the transformation of what one currently perceives as a limitation. One can build capacity for this in order to assert mutuality. Liberatory power helps one refrain from asserting power over others. It also invites one to construct a story about oneself as powerful. It invites us to look for where our power is. And a couple things I want to note here is the second sentence, liberatory power requires a transformation of what one currently perceives as a limitation. So really identifying what that limitation might be, what you think it is, and like kind of imagining different possibilities. And also that building capacity part really is building capacity in your nervous system, building capacity to have those reframes. It's really a lot of unlearning that happens. And like I said, I'm going to go back to the Arthur Ashe quote, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. You don't have to do every single thing. You can pick and start in one place. And we're going to actually have a little homework for that for you for next time. I also like to say scarcity versus abundance. I have my own take on that because these definitions come from Cindy Suarez again. But I always say that the opposite of scarcity actually isn't abundance; it's enough. Because this, when you realize that you are enough, or that this is enough, or I can work with whatever is enough, then abundance is like possible. But scarcity is always going to come from the fact, like this says, that there's limited supplies. So what is enough is a really helpful reframe for me. That also, because if we keep thinking about wanting more and more and more, it actually isn't abundance. It is still that scarcity. But abundance can come from knowing what is enough, because it can grow from there. So I really like to add that nuance. And another great quote that I like a lot is this one from MLK, and it's not one that you will hear a lot. And it actually comes from this book. I'm looking for it here. It's from this book called Power and Love by Adam Kahane. And I actually found out about this book through Priya Parker, who has her book, The Art of Gathering. I mentioned it on a podcast, so I got it. It's really interesting him talking about power and love, and he's done a lot of work with social change and like NGOs and things like that. There were certain things, I'll be honest, like when I read the book that politically I didn't completely align with, but I really felt like a lot of what he was talking about, like conceptually made sense. But this quote is actually like it's like a quote before the book starts. And I really like it. He said, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with the resignation of power and power with the denial of love. Now we've got to get this thing right. What we need to realize is that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. It is precisely this collision of immoral power and powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. I have like chills whenever I read that. Feel free to drop in the chat if that's either new to you or like if you got chills or like that kind of opens your mind kind of in a different way, kind of expands it to think about power a little differently and to think about what power with could be. I'd love to actually hear, what that might have like how that impacted you before we move into the next activity, because I really do love this quote. And it's not, and I'm like, wow, of all the MLK quotes, like I never heard this until Priya Parker had mentioned it because she mentioned this specific quote itself. So yeah, I think it's a really, really important one that if we look at his work and a lot of people who do social change work, we could see that they're able to harness power and have love and have that power with. And we will also see people who we think have power with that are, as we are seeing, yes, with our current times, thank you, Manuel, that like that idea of being a grifter, right? Like they seem to be someone who has power with, but there is that power over. So there's a lot of discernment here that I think is really, really important. But I think if you want to be in integrity with yourself, this is a great way to think about it. So what I'd love to have you do right now is write your own definition of power over versus power with, and actually have these prompts for you to help out. And I'm just dropping them in the chat for you. I'm going to give you a few minutes. So if you can also write your own definition on your own, but I always like to kind of scaffold and give you some prompts that might support you if that's helpful. If you just need something, a jumping off point. So you could say power includes A, B, and C, but power with includes X, Y, or Z. You can visualize how you see power over versus power with in terms of maybe an object or a leader or a metaphor or nature, like if you're a visual person. And think about, how does power over feel in your body? How does power with feel in your body? And you could think of like color. Whenever I move through things and guide people like through somatically or in their body, I ask them what color it is, what size, shape, or texture or sensation they're feeling. One or more of those, whatever resonates for them. So if it helps to connect with your body, which I'm always in support of. I always say that sometimes I think as information workers, what I've noticed is people really seek a lot of it's all about external information, which makes sense for the work it is, but there's a lot of internal information we're missing out on ourselves, and that includes the messages from our body. So those prompts I think can help you. So I'll give you a few minutes, maybe 4 minutes. I'll play some music for you to write your own definition. Okay. All right. So I would love to hear in the chat, or again, if you'd like to raise your hand and share, um, what definitions did you come with? I would love to see, and I love what was in the chat um, about living on a farm. I think that that is like such a beautiful definition. Oh, sorry, I just realized I was trying to look for the chat here. Hmm, I think it was Robin. Yeah, that's what I thought. Um, Living on a farm makes me think about colonial patriarchal perspectives of dominance over nature in contrast to more relational and holistic perspectives that attune to natural rhythms and processes to work with all of the entities of land, plants, and animals. Absolutely. I think nature and ecosystems and ecology, it's actually how I really try to think about my business too. So, it is something that's values aligned, and because so many businesses can be very values aligned, but some can be very extractive, and really thinking about like how is everything working together, how is there interdependence. um, One thing is not more important than the other because it's bigger or produces more or anything. If we think about trees and the mycelium network of, mushrooms, what's so much is beneath the soil that we don't even see, yet it's so incredibly powerful and necessary for us. I think that that is a beautiful way of looking at power with. Thank you. Um, Manuel says a dysfunctional marriage versus one with equal partners, moving together with purpose and being true companions to one another. Yeah. The dysfunctional marriage has a member that lords it over the other, sees them as inferior, insufficient in one way or another. By contrast, partners in the power with see the other as a complement to their abilities in ways that makes both achieve their goals, aspirations, and bring fun and excitement to their I lost my place. um, to their goals, aspirations, and bring fun and excitement to their relationship. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I really, really love this. Um, I love this, and I don't like it too when there's like that power over in relationships. And I think what's really challenging with this, especially in cishet relationships, is that there is that man and woman, like there is that direct thing. But even I'm guessing in non-cishet relationships, that doesn't mean that everyone is still impacted by patriarchy, right? Everyone's impacted by power over in their lives, and that shows up. It really is relationships, whether it's romantic or not, are really like our inner children's needs, our needs from when we were young that weren't met, coming out with that person. And that's why, one thing we're going to talk about is feelings and needs, and really thinking about how not just what are our feelings, but what are our needs based on the feelings we have, and how our behavior. I have a teacher who talks about how behavior is driven by unmet needs. And even in like conflict work that I've seen and done, it really is about how people's needs aren't being met. And for people's needs to be met, both partners have to care about what each other's needs are. I don't think necessarily in a relationship everyone's needs have to be met like by the other person. I also think that we have to look outside in our communities and our friendships and our families. Like there's a lot of ways to meet our needs, including meeting our own needs. But that regard and that care for each other really, really matters. And that isn't something that has, I feel like just in the last 10, 15 years, I've seen more and more about this in terms of really thinking about how we show up as equal partners, how what that could even look like. Um, and yeah, I mean, I myself, and I mean, I'm very open about this. I'm writing a memoir about it. Was in an abusive marriage, and I had to leave, and there was a lot of inequality and a lot of things that um, were harmful and unequal. And I also want to say something, and this will actually leads into what I'm going to talk about next perfectly. One thing that I actually have a teacher, Luis Mojica. He actually made me realize something really big about my marriage, and I think this is something that's helpful for all of us, whatever relationships we're in, personally and professionally. My ex-husband was very like low functioning. Like I was the one doing everything, right? And I think lots of times in cishet relationships, there's that idea of the mental load that women are carrying and weaponizing competence by men, like all of these terms, right, that have come into the mainstream. And that was absolutely my relationship. Um, and he like hypo functioned and I hyper functioned. And a lot of that hyper functioning was a lot of control too. And there's no way I know that I'm not responsible for like the abuse that happened or anything. But I think it's also really important to realize that neither of those are helpful, right? But when someone is very low functioning and not doing anything, that is seen as worse than someone who's doing everything, even though that is also something that is causing the person who's hyper functioning harm. Um, but it doesn't look like it's bad because that person looks like they have their stuff together, right? Like they have it all figured out, they're managing everything. So like they are perceived to have their stuff together, but really they are probably internally not doing very well. And in even though there was power over in my relationship with him having power over me and gaslighting me and manipulating me, I also had the belief that I was better than him in that I had my stuff together. Like I knew what the right thing to do was. I was gonna be responsible, things like that. And I think that there's a lot of nuance in relationships with that because even where there's power under, which we will go soon, really soon into this, there can be a response of better than be as well, even though. So there's a lot of nuance, and I love to talk about this stuff and coach people through it because um, I think like Rashana said, like there is that agency that we have. And that's what I realized. Like I wasn't perfect and no one's perfect in relationships, but I also played into this dynamic and saw myself as better than because I wasn't doing the things he was doing. I was responsible, etc. And I think really, if you look at those trauma-informed reframes, what we could see in a lot of these is that what it's all saying is that we're not better than anyone else because that is inherently a very subtle but impactful power over dynamic that comes into play. Does anyone else have any definitions of power over versus power with that they want to share? I've actually been looking if anyone's raising their hand, but share in the chat or I'd love to hear. I'll give another moment before I move into this last part. All right, let's just take another pause. If you want to take 3 breaths. We'll move into shifting power dynamics. All right. So one thing that I want to say before I get into how power dynamics and the nervous system intermingle, um, that's really important is that having a trauma response is not an excuse for abuse, power over, or harmful behavior. Earlier when we were talking about like that person that cut you off and how they're rude and how that also comes from a place, that doesn't mean that that harmful behavior is okay. You know, there's still accountability that needs to happen. And whenever I talk about accountability, I actually talk about how I was talking to one of my teachers about holding people accountable, and they said something that kind of blew my mind. And I'll share it with you. And they said, you can never hold anyone accountable. People have to take accountability. You can give consequences, but you can never force accountability on someone. And I'm not saying holding accountability means force, but I think the term hold accountability, what we're really trying to say is give consequences. And ultimate, like you can give consequences to someone and they will continue doing what they're doing, or they'll be performative and say they're sorry, but they're not, you know, not a genuine apology. Or general apology plus change of behavior. But they have to be willing to take accountability, right? But just because, like I said, I know that personally, like my ex-husband, I know my mom, like my friends, like whenever they've done something to like hurt me, it comes from an honest place, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that you can have empathy for it without like needing to continue a relationship with someone. And I think that's what often happens in the workplace as well. that you have empathy for someone, that empathy leans into, therefore I still need to be in a relationship with them in a specific way, which you don't necessarily have to do all the things or keep people pleasing or do the things that you're doing. Just because you have the empathy, you could say, okay, this person did this and I understand, but that doesn't mean I have to operate in this kind of going back to the trust piece, like how much living up to the trust that you give someone, you know? So yeah, I just want to start with that caveat. Um, Trauma responses can re-traumatize. And in order to reduce this, being aware of your responses can guide you to take care of yourself and reduce re-traumatization. So this goes back to what I'm saying. You can unintentionally re-traumatize others from your trauma responses. And this can be impacted by the power positions that you have. It really helps to be aware of what those responses might be. So this is the graphic that I have. So this is actually from Kai Cheng Tom, who is a conflict mediator. She created this really great graphic that I redid, that I really, really like. And it has to do with the nervous system responses. So I'm going to go through this and then kind of share what this means for these shifting power dynamics that we might have, that you might see, like someone was in a lower position and now they're in a higher position, how that impacts their response and how it impacts your response too, which we'll get to the next slide. But first, I just want to describe this. So we're looking at in the middle, there's these survival responses, trauma responses. I use them interchangeably. Nervous system responses, I use them interchangeably, just so you know, in terms of vocabulary. So there's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fight is, that kind of has more of like a forward, movement in terms of your body. You're ready to take action. Flight is kind of hiding away, leaving, holding back. Freeze is actually a combination of like a shutdown response and almost wanting, it's like there's like a shutdown, but you have activation within you that wants to do something or has to do something. So that's what freeze is. And fawn is that another way to talk about people pleasing. It is a relational a response to a relational threat. And it is one that makes sense if, in the example I always give is if someone's like breaking into your home and doing something and taking your things, you might say, oh, take everything, like it's fine. That's not because you want them to take things. You're not being nice because you like them, especially in that moment, but you're doing it so you can survive, right? Like you don't want to be hurt. You're saying, take all my stuff, right? And then that comes over into our relationships because we want to belong, because belonging is also a part of survival. And I also talk about Stacey K. Haynes' book that I'm holding here, The Politics of Trauma. She talks about how our human needs are safety, dignity, and belonging. So if you want to belong, we often people please so that people include us in their relationship, so that we worry if someone will leave a relationship or not like us or not be friends with us, or we won't be included in like a professional group or whatever it is. So we people please. So that's what these central responses are. Then there's power under. You could see in this next oval, and the next one is power over. So if you are in a power under position, and I'll make some notes in the future. This isn't necessarily like always what happens, but this is definitely like something that can happen in patterns. So in a fight, if you have a fight response, your power under, it might look like just resistance. If you have a flight response in a power under position, you might escape in some way. Your fawn could be like appeasing someone, just doing the thing, just making them happy, just to, get them off your back, keep them quiet, whatever it is. And freeze is endurance. You're just going to keep going because that's all you could do. Now, if you're in a power over position, it can look different. So fight can look like violence, like psychological violence, emotional violence, physical, like it could look like a lot of, as we see in the world. Flight can look like abandonment. So in a professional setting, it could be like abandoning your team. If you are in a power over position and you have a kind of a flight response to something, it can look like abandonment. Fawn, it can look like manipulation in a power over position. And a freeze, it could be neglect. Like you're so frozen that you neglect things. So that is what this graphic means. So, but I do want to make a couple of notes. This does not mean that anyone who has power will respond in this way. But if you take action with a power over mentality, this is what is very possible. And these are very common patterns that happen. So if you can imagine relationships in your lives where someone has a power over position, and that could be like a direct hierarchical, like this is your boss, or whoever it is, your boss's boss. It can also be a parent figure. It can even be even in like that relationship, like Manuel said, like someone who does end up having more power in that relationship. It could look gender, race, sexuality, ability, could look like all these different ways. There's a lot of different intersections. It could also be class. So there can be someone who might be a person of color, but they are in a higher class, right? So there's a lot of nuance here, but this is a way to look at it. And those who may have power under also might perceive this about someone who has power over. So if you have power under and you have like more, think about the fawn response, you might perceive that the person with power over is manipulating you, and that can create a sense of unsafety with you. And those with power over can also assume that this is what someone with power under is doing, whether they're like doing it or not. And that assumption itself can lead to behaviors, communication, and how you relate to someone else, and how the story you create in your head about what that person is, and what they think, and all that. I mean, I can't tell you how much I've like ruminated on that myself, right? So this can also lead to viewing these responses as a problem instead of valid responses, right? Looking at it as a problem versus a solution. Now, like I said, if someone has a power over position, it's not your responsibility to be like, oh, it sounds like you're abandoning and like that is hurting us or whatever. Like that's not necessarily your responsibility, but it is something that you can notice and realize that that is impacting how you're relating to the person. And depending on your relationship, you can respond and have a conversation. And you also, like I said, may have intersections of power. So like I'm a woman, but I'm straight, cisgender. I grew up middle class. So that can show the different variety of responses we can enact in our context and trauma history. Actually, one thing I even noticed myself yesterday, I was talking to one of my teachers, and we're going to co-facilitate something really cool in May. Definitely sign up for my email list if you're interested in something about mother-daughter relationships, and how you can move from tension to intimacy. But this is one of my teachers, and I really, really respect them. And I just noticed when we were talking about this, there was a part of me that was like holding back or thinking about the right thing to say that they would like, which that was actually, again, my perception of what they would want. It wasn't necessarily what they wanted, but it was like my own appeasing that caused that. And then eventually halfway through the meeting, I'm like, what am I doing? Like because I've done so much of this work, I have a very strong awareness. I'm like, I'm trying to think about like what I believe that they like to hear, right? But that really wasn't. And then when I just stopped doing that, I don't think that they saw the conversation as bad or like incongruent at any point, but it felt that way for me. So before I move to the next slide where we get to go a little further with this graphic, I did want to pause and ask if for anyone saw like first impressions with this, anyone who has, if you have questions about this, because I know this like it's like a, full complex kind of graphic. I just wanted to make space for that. This is very helpful. Great. I'm so glad. Yeah. I think even like looking at this, like we're going to get more into it next time, but like, but that's why I wanted to leave you with this so that you could think about it because there's so much to think about here. Good. You're getting some +1s, thumbs up. Yeah. To think about it and how this shows up in the relationships you have professionally and personally. Not to like point fingers and like, necessary, but just to realize like what is actually happening here, Yeah, a lot to reflect. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the next slide. So shifting from power under to power over. So um, this is really where, like, say you are someone who's a new manager and you've never been in a manager position. Um, and your typical response for flight was escape. Now that you're in a power over position, and I just did these as examples, it can really go in any direction. If you're in a power over position, I'm not saying meaning that you are enacting things power over intentionally, but just being like more in that power over, like that you are someone's boss. Um, it might move to being a freeze response of neglect, right? If your power under response, and I have this, you could see the underlines together. That's how I indicated this, just to like think about it in terms of the framework. If your response is to resist and fight, it might actually move to abandonment. It could also be that it's violence, you know? And this is why I think it's really important for us to tend to and notice what our own responses are, for ourselves, to do that. And then if your freeze response is endurance, it might actually move to violence. If it's resistance, it could move to abandonment. If it's appeasement, it could move to manipulation. But it could really move in any direction. So I just wanted to share how moving from power under to power over, and again, that can also be a perception of what you perceive about someone else. Like, oh, they used to escape, but now they're like enacting like psychological violence or like whatever, you know, they're being extracting from us. And that could also maybe be manipulation or violence, or however you want to put it. Um, but I just kind of wanted to share what can happen moving from power under to power over and how that can shift actually. And this is also why I say this internal work is so important, to have that awareness. And I know that there's going to be so many instances where we just wish someone else would change. And sometimes that's just not like in our power. But I do think being aware of having your own agency and knowing what you can do impacts how that dynamic plays out, right? If you're um there is like a response of like over explaining things, which can be a form of like appeasement, like feeling the need to explain yourself a lot. um Maybe you stop doing that, or you don't do that as much, and the other person's expecting it. That could impact how they respond. Now, I want to say, I think it's important to not change behavior in order to change someone else's behavior or with that hope, because you never know what's going to happen. But that is also something that could be supportive for yourself. So I just kind of wanted to like land there. Um, yeah. Any questions about this before? I have just a couple slides left, so, and then we'll have some time for questions. Roshana says, everyday life, every relationship, friendship, and the social ladder. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I always talk about, when I talk about trauma informed care, I'm not just talking about in the workplace, I'm talking about being a trauma informed person, because that will spill over into the workplace and anything that you do. And having this awareness and knowing this um, will impact that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So power with. So power with acknowledges the shift in power dynamics. Um, so really do self check-ins to note, if for power over, to notice if a threat um, is about ego or actual safety, right? Um, is a threat that you perceive is about something that is going to actually happen? Or is it something that is perceived in that way? And power under, notice if a threat is about the threat of power over responses or actual safety. So if you are in a power over position, just notice that. Like, if I feel threatened, is this because my ego is being threatened, or because there's an actual unsafe situation? And if you're in a power under position, um, um, noticing if a threat is about the power over responses that are coming, or um, like that perception of it, or like an actual safety. It's just a helpful check-in. Manuel says, do you have a prompt or a way to help us identify our traumas? That's something that to me is like lifelong, to be quite honest. Like, I mean, I coach people through that. I do have a nervous system mapping workshop that I give institutions and organizations. And I have it in, it's actually one thing that I did with my course so that you can map your responses to the different nervous system responses: fight, flight, fight, like it's based on the polyvagal ladder, which I didn't really get into today, but where you feel safe, where you feel that fight or flight versus where you feel dissociation and shutdown. And you map like what has happened to you and how you respond to it. And that's actually in my course. But I also have, yeah, if you want, you could just like message me. Like I also do like coaching one-on-one. And if your institution supports coaching, that is something I do. But a prompt, I might actually, you know what I'll do, Manuel, also think about maybe a couple prompts and send them with the follow-up information to because to identify our traumas, that's just like very big. I mean, I even like over time have been not even realized what that has been, because there's also things that happen systemically, like intergenerational trauma versus like something that just happened within your lifetime to you. So yeah, but thank you for asking, because yeah, I'll make a note to provide some prompts for that. And I might just do it more about like nervous system responses and the trauma itself. Yeah. Okay. So this video, I'll play it next time too. And it's just to lead us into next time. I'll make sure, I think I'm sharing my sound. I don't know if I am. Yes, I am. Okay. So just something fun to listen to.
The best metaphor I've come up with to teach people how to relate to their feelings is to look at how they relate to their poop. That's right. Because when you got the urge to go this morning or earlier today or whenever it was, did you buy something or eat something or smoke something or try to get validation on TikTok to make that feeling go away? Or did you go to the nearest bathroom and leave a poop? I'm guessing you did number two, literally because you're potty trained. So you know that the only way to not have that feeling inside is to go poop. But you and I, we weren't emotionally potty trained. So most of us, when we have an uncomfortable rumbling of sensation, that's emotion in our bodies, we do everything we can to try to get away from it. And what that means is that we're just backed up with shit. So the deal is, if you want to heal, if you actually want to like have a stable emotional baseline, you need to learn how to have your feeling poops, how to let your poop go, how to not dig in it.
Okay. So you get the idea. So yeah, we really don't have literacy for our emotions and feelings, in terms of we might intellectually know what they are, but we aren't like actually understanding and letting ourselves feel it. And a lot of times we want our feelings to go away, whether that's conscious or subconscious. So we're going to talk about the feelings and needs and how that also relates to how you relate to other people, because someone's promoted and now they're in a different position and you might be like, oh, I don't really, I feel like I can't tell them certain things. What are your feelings about that? And what do you need? That's a beautiful way to start relating to yourself, to start shifting those patterns. So today was a lot of the foundation and some hopefully helpful tools for you. But what I'd love for you to do for next time, for the homework, and I'll drop this in the chat and share for the follow-up email, is to oops, wait, I'm on the wrong one. Notice how you feel and your own nervous system responses when it comes to a specific power dynamic that is challenging and or shifting for you. That could also, actually, that could be the prompt. I just realized. Notice how you feel, what your responses are. And even if you're not like, I don't know if this is fight or flight or whatever, you could just say like, this is what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to run away, or I wanted to bang the table, or whatever it is. I'm not judging you for any of those things. Just notice what they are. When there's, and just think, you could just think about one or two dynamics. You don't have to think about a lot, and I'm dropping that in the chat as well. So notice what those responses are when it comes to a specific power dynamic that is challenging or something that's shifting. And then the second is bring those definitions of power over power with that you wrote today, just to have that. Um, and then the last part is I love your feedback. And when you give your feedback, you'll also get, um, I'll drop this link in the chat too, or you could use the QR code. Um, It'll give you a link to download these slides. So that will be extremely helpful for me so that, like I said, I can make this better, see what I can improve. A lot of navigating relational change, it's really important to have this basis and think about what trauma-informed care reframes you want to implement, and also think about how these power dynamics are impacting you based on your own nervous responses, and also what you perceive about other people's nervous system responses, and what they actually might be doing, and how that is impacting your relationship with them. And I think that's kind of where you start. One thing I always say, and I'm starting to do more workshops about trauma-informed communication strategies because I've created a framework for that. It's not just about what you say, it's about your integrity in saying it and how you're doing it, which is why, I sometimes I give like kind of scripts and prompts and, ways to start and say things, because I think that's just a helpful way to scaffold. But I think we really need to start with what's within. So we're not just saying something when we're actually thinking about this person, like, oh, this person is just so annoying, and that is a very normal thing to think about people that you work with and people in your personal life. But that congruence is really, really important before you try to address a situation. So that's why I provide this foundational information. So yeah, thank you so much. And that link is in there, so please fill that out. That's really, really helpful for me. And also, it also has a space if you want to leave your information, if you think that this would benefit an organization you work at, or a group that you're a part of, or whatever it might be. Even if it's outside of libraries, I do these talks outside of libraries as well. So I can connect with you about that if that's something you're interested in. So yeah, you have, we don't have too much time, but if anyone has any questions, I'm here for it. I just realized my screen's like low. Oops. Okay. um, Oh, good. Thank you, Tara. I'm so glad it was powerful for you. Thank you so much. And actually, if people want to drop what's one takeaway that you're taking away from today's session, just one, I'd love to hear that or read that. Something that can help you to that with that brain is plastic thing. Remember what that can help you with, and also goes with Arthur Ashe's quote to just start where you are. Think about that one takeaway and how it could be supportive for you. I really enjoyed the graphic with the fight, freeze. I can't even say it, flight, fight, freeze, fawn. I hadn't heard of fawn before. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, fawn is a really big one, and it's something I see a lot with library workers. Um, so much that they'll see a presentation and reach out to me for coaching because they realize that pattern is so deep. And it's, for me, it's like if you spot it, you got it. Like I totally, like I notice it with people because I've done it and I still do. And none of this is about not being triggered ever, not ever like people pleasing or anything. It's about having the tools when you do that, and awareness. And also the part of the tools is the compassion, which is why, and I'll drop these again. Which is one of those tools in the 7 tools to cultivate revolutionary relationships. So I'll drop those again if you want to get those tools, or get added to my email list. Fawn is definitely related to vocational awe and library work. Absolutely, yeah. The homework question will be a good reflection. Good, I'm so glad. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Um, yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you in a couple weeks, hopefully. And for everyone who's watching, thank you for watching.